Thank you for joining us today for our webinar entitled How to Build and Implement Your Company's Information Security Program. My name is Allison Schaefer, and I will be your moderator today. This webinar is the third of 4 of the Financial Ploys webinar series, Cybersecurity and Data Privacy. Speaking of the slides, you should understand that from the get-go, we will not be going step-by-step through the PowerPoint in order, nor will you have to listen to us read any slides. This webinar, like all Financial Ploys webinars, is a conversation. Our wonderful and very knowledgeable panelists today are Rita Gary of counsel at Howard & Howard and Eduardo Campos, President and Managing Partner at Embedded Knowledge, Inc. As I said, my name is Allison Schaefer, and I am legal and regulatory counsel at Gem Trading Group. We appreciate that you are not spending your time or money to attend this webinar to hear infomercials about us. You can read more about us in the PowerPoint. This webinar is a production of Financial Ploys, and to sign up for the great free weekly newsletter, go to financialploys.com/subscribe. If you're attending the live premiere of this webinar, you can submit questions using the web portal. And if you're watching this on demand or have any questions after the webinar, you can send an email to info@financialploys.com. Just include your question and the name of the webinar episode, and we will do our best to get you an answer. All right, let's get started. So we will start very basic. Rita, can you please explain to the group what is information security?
Well, nice to have you all here with us today. Thank you. When I think about information security, I really kind of think about what, when, and why. So what is information that needs to be secure? And that's pretty clear that there are companies with important intellectual property, important confidential information that might be about human beings, but about other businesses as well. And then all their digital data. And then I think about when. Well, when does it need to be secure? When it's stored, when it's transmitted, and when it's processed. And then I think about why. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability is the traditional CIA triad of information security. And so you want to be thinking about, how do I keep this valuable information that I have confidential, and that we know it's true and honest, and it has integrity, and that we can get access to it without interruption. So that's basically information security.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, very high level, but also, easily understandable definition of that. And Eduardo, now that we know what information security is, what is an information security program? How do we treat information security?
I used to say to my clients that you have to write what you do and do what you write. It is really for the formalization of what Rita was sharing with us. It is defining a general approach to how the organization deals with protecting information. It also addresses how it could be. It used to be a manual on paper, and today it's all on the phones, on the screens. It's a place where you can understand what to do to protect the company's information, and also what happens when everything fails and the criminals get through. How to recover, how to identify issues, who should be contacted, what should be my role if I am not working in cybersecurity, and I'm not working in IT, I'm working on the business side. Also, the ultimate goal is to protect the reputation of the organization. We've seen way too many cases of ransomware where the criminals just lock down all the information in the organization's computer, and they ask for money to unlock it. And how to avoid that? If that happens, what should I do? Also, something that I see a lot in organizations that forget about the policies that talk about the rights of the customers. How can they complain? How can they participate? How can they give the organization a heads up about problems? There's a major case of a credit card company about 4 years ago. They were made aware about a hacking, about an attack, because a client noticed something wrong, went online, and there was a clear set of instructions on how to report an issue. And that alerted the major financial institution, and that helped to contain, and today the criminal is behind bars.
Yeah, you touched on so many important points just now, reputation of the company, protecting customers and clients. But I think, interestingly enough, you make a very good point where it's a lot of times the companies aren't even the first ones that are aware of an issue, right? It happens from an external party bringing it to your attention. Basically, everything that we will be discussing during this webinar today is going to be touching on why your company may need an information security program and how do you implement one and what's appropriate for your company. So I guess going to the next, obvious question is, why would a company need an information security program, Rita? It seems so obvious to those of us that if you have experienced an incident or if you're in the industry, but a lot of companies are asking this question. We don't have a lot already implemented. We don't have anything in place. Kind of where do we start if we even need something? And so how do we explain what types of companies would need this program?
It's so true. I get a call once a week from a client or a potential client who's experiencing their first cybersecurity intrusion. And in this case, it was a ransomware situation. And when confronted with those situations, it's amazing to me that we are in 2024, almost 2025, and people still do not know how to react. I just read a statistic just this morning that the FBI reported in 2023, close to 900,000 complaints were made to IC3. And this is the FBI complaints records. Now, it's probably larger than that. But of those complaints, they're estimating that that's $12.5 billion that's lost through various costs associated with a cyber incident. Big or small, you lose productivity, and they didn't have a backup situation either. So, the storage was all in the cloud with no sufficient backup in their case. And so they were turning to their insurance company because they have to rely on that as a backstop to the losses that they're going to incur as a result. So they're just at the beginning of the journey, which is you're having an incident, and then how do we get past it? So I don't really know why. I mean, I don't know why you would ask the question almost why you need one, because everybody needs one. Everyone is going to experience some sort of cyber intrusion one way or another. And those companies continue to this day to surprise me that they're surprised that they're having a problem.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's not, do I need one? It's what type of program do I need, right? Given the type of information, maybe, you have more internal or employee type data, or do you have, millions of customers and clients? Are you a global corporation? Are you just in certain states? So I agree with you. It's not asking the question of, do I need one, but really, what kind do I need? And then how do I implement it? Because I think we all know you can have anything you want in your policy and procedures and just in writing, but are you actually implementing what you actually say that you're doing, which is, of course, always, the most difficult piece when it comes to these like new regulations that come out. But I think certainly, yes, do I need one is a silly question at this point in the year that we're in and everything that we've seen across the board. And I'm sure you are 100% right that it's probably, at least 2 or 3-fold what, has actually
Yeah,
been
right.
documented on the FBI. site just because people probably, they're dealing with it internally. And so most probably don't even realize we should be going to the FBI, right? So
Yeah, I informed them on that particular case. They didn't even know that there was such a thing. So,
right. That's not where their, first thought goes to.
right.
But yes, very, very helpful. And there's just, so many reasons for why you need one, and the scope and what's involved. And it's really just understanding the best policies to implement for your company. So Eduardo, how is an information security program different than an incident response plan? Both very important. How are they different?
Before, the incident response plan was part of the information security plan, but today, with so many attacks and so many incidents that happen, many larger organizations decided to have a separate team in dealing with incidents. And then that's a smart decision. Because in the information security program, it's all about preventing the criminals to succeed, holding them back at the door. And the incident response plan, the incident response team is all about what if everything failed because the criminals found a way around the technology controls, or there was a disgruntled employee, or there was a failure that affected the infrastructure, the critical infrastructure of the country or of a region. So the instant response plan is about recovering, responding to the incident, and then recovering from the incident. That is, first of all, I have to respond to what's happening or to what happened. And then I need to recover because I might have to bring my backups to have the information that I kept stored away in a previous version. I have to bring that back and recover my financial systems, my invoice systems, my sales systems. The incident response plan also deals with what the employees, what the executives, what the service providers, the vendors should do. I had a case where there was a major fire and destroyed the data center. The next day, the employees on Monday, they didn't, over the weekend, and the employees didn't know what to do. They all gathered in front of what was the data center of the organization, waiting for instructions. They didn't have any training, so they were there. People died in the fire, so it was really tragic, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't know who was in charge. So that showed how important it is to have an incident response plan and to train how to use the incident response plan. So the information security program is about really preventing, detecting any problem, and responding and recovering is about the incident response plan, the incident response team, and both teams work together, especially in large organizations.
Yeah, very helpful. And I think that's an excellent point that yes, there's separate policies and programs, but very much are intertwined, right? The people are intertwined, the communications, the remedial steps, everything. So really understanding, you really can't have one without the other, right? You need the information security program as a critical component to any organization, right? Regardless of your size or the type of data you're retaining. It's just good to have that, right? A comprehensive set of information security policies and procedures. You know what needs to be done, what should be done, training, following it. And then in the event that something does happen, you switch over to this other program, this other plan to kind of walk through the steps, what records need to be retained, right? To your point, understanding what, investigative research we need to do, what needs to be retained, who do we reach out to, notifications, right? That's a huge piece depending on jurisdiction. But also remedial steps is a huge element of that plan and program. Something happened, we understand why. What are we doing internally to change that moving forward to make sure it doesn't happen moving forward. So yes, I think you can't have one without the other, but also they are, very different, and both are very, very essential to the organization. There are a number of laws and regulations that have, governed over the last, really have evolved over the last few years with regard to information security programs. Rita, can you touch on some of those and what you think would be the most important ones to highlight, at least right now?
Well, I think we have to look at it this way, is that privacy of our personal information is essential to the security, and the security is essential to the privacy. We have 50 states law, well, 50 breach notification law, 50 states with breach notification laws in the United States, and probably 170 worldwide, if not more. So what does that tell you? Well, it says that the law values your privacy relative to your personal information. And what good is my privacy if it's not secure? So built into those privacy laws are also cybersecurity requirements. So they look to say to everybody the administrative and technical pieces to an information security program is part and parcel to keeping things private. So you have, at least in the United States, of course, you have all those breach notification laws, which really hinge on privacy and security. And then also you have layered in what people have called patchwork, or the crazy quilt of what the US laws are in terms of federal sectoral laws about privacy, but they're also underlaying all of the privacy pieces is a cybersecurity piece. So you not only have federal laws, the FTC is focusing heavily on, what is a UDAP, which is a Deceptive Practices Act kind of violation. And then, of course, you have all these states now, close to 40 different states have enacted cybersecurity regulations and laws. California leads the way on this. I think New York is we have some of the materials on New York and Massachusetts, but we have California has been the leader at the state level in the United States. And so what you have there is that, again, shows the connection between privacy and security, because first they give you the privacy rights, the right to control your personal information. Well, if the company I give my personal information to doesn't have a security program in place, they won't be able to allow me to exercise those rights. So, you have to be able to respond to my requests. And how do you do that? Well, that means you've categorized my information, and you've kept an inventory of it, and you're keeping it secure so that you can get access to it. So you have the SEC recently in, I believe, July of 2023, that came through with publicly traded companies and regulated entities involved with the SEC with some very stringent cybersecurity requirements, including reporting cybersecurity incidents once they've reached a materiality level. And I think once you've got a materiality level, I think you've got 3 days to make that disclosure. So the layering of the laws, federal, state, global, is one reason. Another reason is that sophisticated vendors, independent contractors, and other people that you're doing business with who have maybe tuned into this in a more, specific way will demand to see your written information security program and your incident response plan before they'll do business with you. So it's not only a legal regulatory demand, it's a market demand as well. And then the final piece is you will probably not get sufficient cyber insurance if you don't have these things in place to document how you're going to respond to these cybersecurity incidents. So it's a must to have it all, unfortunately, to get where you want to be. And
Yeah.
you want to be legally compliant, and you want to protect the information that you're holding as a custodian and you want to try and make sure that you're protecting the company's assets by having appropriate coverage.
Certainly. And it gets so complex, right? If you are a global organization or even, a national organization that's dealing in more than one state, more than one country, you're obviously, dealing with these competing and evolving regulations constantly. And so, sometimes you need to do an analysis, understanding what's the strictest standard and maybe just follow that across the board. But we can get to that in a little bit as well. But yeah, really doing an analysis, understanding if you're collecting certain data from jurisdictions, what really applies to you because these elaborate laws are just continuing
I,
to come and I don't see them stopping anytime
I,
soon.
jo I joked, and when early on I joked with one of my clients. I said, "Can we have different colors for different countries so we know exactly what oh, we have a purple person from, you know, England or where." But if there was some way to code into the data that was flowing into our system, would make it a whole lot easier to determine what regulatory environment I'm living in.
And then you also touched on kind of like the fundamental rights of individuals, right? Protecting the individuals and giving them rights. And obviously, that's a huge element coming out of GDPR. I think we've seen kind of how that view is different than the US, at least, the US is certainly evolving out of, California with CCPA, but definitely with GDPR, kind of putting the individual at the forefront and creating the regulation and the protections around the individual, which I think is the right way to do it personally, right? Because what is the, you know, entire point of doing this? You want to protect the individual and their rights and their data, and the security for that individual. And so you're starting to see that more in the US now, which is nice too, because if you did implement GDPR for your company, you're a bit of ahead of the game with CCPA or other regulations that are coming out of New York or Massachusetts. And
And
again,
even the White House, even the White House is putting out executive orders regarding cybersecurity requirements around data, particularly in regards to sanctioned or specific countries where people who are looking to access data. So yeah, it's really, again, it's regulatory, yes, is one thing, but it's just sort of mandatory good business practice to do it.
certainly, definitely. Um, yeah, we know we're talking about all these different types of data and information, but Eduardo, what information do we really need to protect at the end of the day?
That's a good point to be explored, because here I believe we have an opportunity to step back in reflect and realize that this is that we're talking about information security program and protecting information is way too much for a single team, a single person. You mentioned some regulations that are focused on data protection, not only the information, but also privacy. So because of at the time, we are focusing here on the information security programs. But we need to understand at this point that the information that needs to be protected is the one that is considered valuable for the organization, or that is under a mandatory requirement by a law or by a regulation like GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation from Europe, then it's being adopted everywhere across the globe. So we need really to count on a team that is really that comes from different organization parts of the organization. So more than ever, lawyers are being involved, and in many cases leading the information security efforts together with the technology department, because this is not only technology. How about information that we are speaking on our phones? How about information that is on whiteboards, that is on it is left on paper on the desks, or that we are sharing while we are running during our time in the gym. So it is in the intellectual property. It is the healthcare information. It is information that concerns our clients. It is the strategic information related to our business. That new product, how many cases we heard about where a new product was about to be announced and the competition launched first and stole the thunder of the other company because the information was not properly protected. So it is the operational information, but it's also the information that we are required by law to keep protected. And that's where we need a team made of representatives from all departments. And especially when I was the chief information security officer, I always had my partners in the legal department working together, because it is so much there, like Rita is saying, there are so many regulatory requirements that are, as technical people, we are not going to know what might be forgetting. So it is really the type of information that we need to keep protected is the information that concerns the business, but also is required by law to be protected.
Yeah, I think those are all extremely good points. It's just, it's so difficult to try and determine what's best for the company and for the information. And so, working through that is certainly difficult. Um, and you touched on this a bit as well, but Rita, I don't know if you have anything to add, but like why we need to protect this personal information. Obviously, we have a fiduciary duty and responsibility and duty to personnel or duty to customers and clients and part of the business. And I know we already touched on kind of reputation, but why else, right? We touched on the laws. I get it, it's really everything, but I don't know if you have anything to add there as well.
Well, for me, as a privacy attorney, it's like I try to explain to clients how important it is to not just appear, but actually care about the fact that personal information you have, business information about others, and personal information about citizens of whatever regulated country you're in is not yours.
Mhm.
It's yours to use and process, but you should be doing so in a custodial and clear way. And that's what, going back even to the 1980s, which we started with the FAIR principles of information privacy policy. And, it's really something we have to all be thinking about is that data, a lot of that data is not yours. And how do you respond to the growing rights that people have to enforce against you? I think every day I get alerts on all the class action lawsuits that are being brought against everyone. You can every day at least 15 alerts I get, and I think to myself, it's amazing to me that Sephora was sharing all their customers' data without disclosing that information, and they were fined $2 million by the California. I don't know if it was a class action or a regulatory matter, but it ended up costing them $2 million. We have a very active FTC group right now, and they're using their powers to dictate to companies across the board very specific information privacy and information security requirements. So it's reputational, it's minimization of risk, and it's being fair to the data owners.
Certainly. And I think, companies don't want to work with other third-party vendors or other companies that have had breaches, right? That don't care, to your point, about the data. And so you're also starting to see, in conjunction with internally putting things into place for your own company, going out and doing, more thorough due diligence on these third-party vendors that you're paying for a service, right? That you're sharing data with. So I know, at least in my own situation over the last few years, we've definitely seen an increased process, a more thorough and robust process when we want to onboard a new vendor. We're asking them more questions. We want to know if they have a SOC 2. We're analyzing what they do, what type of security program they have. what kind of incident response plan they have, if they've had an incident, what remedial steps they've been taking. We want to know all of this information before we're even signing a contract with them. And if there's any red flags that are being waived, we're looking into it. And that goes the same, even if we've had a relationship with a third party for years, we want to know if they've had an incident. So on an annual basis, we will send out a questionnaire and we want any updates. Has anything changed? Have there been any incidents? And if something has happened, I mean, by all means, terminate the relationship if you feel uncomfortable continuing to share your data with this third party. So yes, reputation from a business standpoint, certainly, as well as from, having customers and clients. People are now rethinking, do I want to give my information to companies like Sephora? Maybe I won't even sign up for the benefits program or for the emails if they're not treating my data appropriately, right? $2 million, large fine, but you've seen companies that have hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. And so, it behooves you for a number of reasons to take this seriously, certainly.
Yeah. I was thinking you're talking about vendors, the case of a firm that buy now, pay later fintech company was fined because their bank that they process payments through was hacked. And they were spanked because they didn't do their vendor research. And they were fined because you didn't do that check on your vendor.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. And you're seeing a lot of these different, like out of the Netherlands right now. I don't know how familiar you are with DORA, but it's basically exactly
It's
that.
coming.
Right, exactly. The Digital Operational Resilience Act. And that's exactly what it's speaking to, right? Understanding your own internal resilience, but also who are you working with, right? They want to know who are all these critical functions and critical third parties that you are working with. And have you done your due diligence? Are they doing what's appropriate? Are you getting the proper documentation in place between the two? So you're seeing now a lot of these different regulations kind of working together. And so if you do have a good plan in place, then it's really helping you, with regulations coming down the pike that are not necessarily even in the data protection and privacy space, right? I would argue that's more on the cybersecurity side of things. Obviously, they're all intertwined, but again, it's not stopping anytime soon. So
No,
might
not
as
at
well
all.
spend some
Not at
time and
all.
effort on it now. But Eduardo, moving on a little bit, what are some key elements of an effective information security policy?
So we talked a little bit about this, and I believe we're going to go in detail if we have time. But we need to, as any plan, we need a purpose. What we are trying to achieve. What is the scope? I saw in the past so ambitious information security programs that they had no budget or no people, enough people to, or no tools to do what they are trying to do. So you have to have a scope that is really, it's going to be our branch. It's part of a bigger plan, but we are going to take care of this organization here. It is our headquarters. We need to have a scope. We need also to touch the, like Rita mentioned in the beginning, the CIA triad, the confidentiality, integrity, accessibility, availability. So it's really confidentiality. It's people have access to the information if they need to have access to the information, right? The ones that do not have a need, keep them out. Integrity, the information was not altered from point A to point B. And availability, the information is available when the information is needed. So like the case of the resilience, for example, that the regulation is coming, um, uh, the most visible part of the information security program is the access control. So we need an access control policy. We're going to talk a little bit later. Classification of the data, how we are going to train vendors, employees, leadership to become more aware. So the security awareness training program. And then working together with HR, who's responsible for what? Responsibilities, duties, ways to communicate a breach, ways to complain, ways to represent a client, how to be compliant with the most relevant laws, because the legal department is going to be covering that, but at least the minimum. So if I'm in California and I need to know about the California Consumer Protection Act, something has to be there, just a summary, and maybe an email or a phone to talk to the legal department. But in a nutshell, it's keep it simple, but keep it really and easy to maintain, to keep it, but I keep it in a way that you can easily, if an employee has something to report, they can easily reach out to the person in charge of it.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And Rita, what policies or procedures should be included in an information security program? What are the most important elements that should always be included?
Well, I think what Eduardo said at the end there was really key, which is your biggest source of risk and your biggest source of resources is your employees and your customers.
Mhm.
So if you're not listening to either one of them and you're not paying attention to what they're telling you, and they don't feel able to disclose it, to be open and honest about it, there isn't an awareness across the board. This is okay to say, this is okay to do, then you have too much times I've seen in real life, real time, people just sort of sweeping things under the rug and ignoring intrusions into their system because they don't feel safe telling somebody else about it. So I think I was thinking about this as I was looking at these questions going, we have a human resource manual. We're all very familiar with it, the employee handbook. I think we're going to have a second version that talks about data and cybersecurity. And that second version is probably going to, I mean, we all care about PTO and overtime pay and how things like that happen, but we're going to have to become more sensitive to how does this organization treat its data, and how do I, as a good employee, carry out my job as a data steward. And so you're going to have data management policies, which is inventorying, categorizing data, making sure it gets put in the right file cabinet and it's been sorted and we know what's there. And that's part of what we all do all of us do every day in our own lives, right? We have to use, as part of the backup policies, this is a workforce facing policy, which says, users cannot put 123, 123, 123 as a password. And, and if you're not using a multi-factor authentication process, that's a policy. It becomes a policy that you must, and the employees must do these things to get access to the system. The other thing Eduardo said is credentialing. Credential only those people who need to be into that space, into that file cabinet where we put the sensitive stuff. Talk about the actual, technical piece about patching, and Eduardo can speak more intelligently to this than I can, but that part of it is the CISO's job and his team's job to document everything. It is a job I would not want to have, to be honest with you. They must be up day and night, worrying about taking care of things. But thinking about what I saw recently, because of Gen AI and AI generally, people are trying to prioritize, how alerts are sent out on when there's intrusions, because there's an awful lot of intrusions every day that are not meaningful or material. And, do you have a CISO that's up 24/7 trying to deal with all of this? He needs a team, she needs a team to make all this happen and help, maybe automated help. Vendor management, you talked about, and of course, the incident response and doing tabletop exercises so that I don't get those calls. We just got our system ransomed to us. What do we do? And we don't have a backup. So those are the kinds of things I would put in my that would back up my workforce facing policies in terms of what we do with our information security.
All very helpful. Yes, it's a lot. One thing you did mention was, limited access to the data, only individuals kind of on a need to know basis. How do you determine that, Eduardo? Who should really have access to this data within the company?
What I like that the deck that we're going to share with the audience is that it really simplifies classification of data. If we are in the military or in government, you are going to have top secrets. You're going to have for your eyes, for a few eyes only. But if you are in an organization, usually you're going to have three layers of classification. One that is the high risk, highly confidential information. You have a confidential information and then the public information. This high risk or highly confidential class for information is about the information that if that information goes out without control, if someone that it doesn't have the right to access the information, has access to the information, this could really damage the business, the reputation of the organization. Could be personal information, healthcare information, could be information should be private. And also, like I mentioned earlier, the plans to launch a new product, the intellectual property that is critical for the organization. That should be considered really high risk information. Confidential information is information that's internal. So could be performance reviews, could be awards, could be some internal procedures that are, if they are accessed, there will be damage, but it's not going to be something that is going to risk to take the company out of the business. And the public information is the one that if it goes to the website, it goes to the internet, there's no problem. So marketing information that is out there, the PR release that are authorized to be public. And then that kind of a classification should apply not only for the information that is in the computers, but also in everybody's heads, how we should train, and we're going to talk a little bit about awareness training programs, but it's how we should train employees to be aware that confidential information, high risk, highly confidential information should not be the subject of conversations in public places. So how many of you had the opportunity to be in an elevator, for example, in New York, in Chicago, where you're going up, I don't know, 13, 20 floors, and people are discussing on Monday morning or coming back from lunch, they're discussing very classified, very much high risk information, classified information in the elevator. They don't know who is there, right? Also, I had, when I was a chief information security officer, we had to send some of our security analysts to be members of the gym because we knew that the information was leaking somewhere, and we suspected it was because somebody was in the gym, and we had several competitors that had people going to the same gym with the goal of really gathering information about, we were about to launch a very classified product, it would really differentiate the company. And we spotted a couple of engineers that were really excited about their work, and they were talking about it while running on the treadmill. So we didn't punish them. We just called them up and talked to them. And actually, one of them volunteered to teach that situation to other employees when we are doing training programs. They said, I would never imagine the competition would have someone in the gym with a specific goal of listening to us. So this kind of thing is that we have to really pay attention, simplify the classification of data, high risk, highly confidential in public, but I really train your team and the organization to identify that kind of information and behave according to the class of that information was classified into.
Yeah, we laugh, but I tell the exact same story almost when we do training during the onboarding process for new employees, right? You never know who's around you in an elevator, at lunch, at a conference. Just don't talk about it, right? You could be talking to individuals that work at the same company as you. You don't know who's around you. And so just being very cognizant of that and, taking it seriously because you never know what will happen. We touched on this a little bit. Rita, you mentioned it, and Eduardo, you mentioned it as well, but kind of the classifying of data, right? And why we should classify this data. I know, Rita, you mentioned we're kind of always doing this with data mapping and, understanding what we have, but how and why do we really do this?
Well, I think you've got to get back to basics, and it's because, we remember when we didn't have digital information and we had paper information, we put highly classified information in a cabinet with one person having a key. So you credential somebody now because that digital credentials gets you into that file cabinet now. Um, and I would add another classification of data to that list because I'm a privacy attorney, but I would add a class called not yours.
Yeah.
But sorry, what else? What were you aiming for there? I've lost my train of thought.
I guess just the importance of classifying the data.
Basic inventory. You talk about data mapping and inventory. It's a basic. It's absolutely a basic. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to companies and they don't even know what kind of information they have and where it is. So a lot of people, and that's because, they've set things up, it's working, it's been working. Why do I want to, screw around with something that's working? It's all in the cloud, it's very secure. I'm not worried about it. Well, that's of course, rose-colored glasses because, even the cloud does not provide the level of contractual security requirements that you need to be feeling like somebody else is taking care of this. You have to take care of it. Um, so inventory is a basic. And the other thing I'll say is recently, both the US FTC and the legislation that's proposed in Congress now has put a high priority on data minimization. And it becomes a very important part of knowing what I take into inventory data-wise and what I get rid of data-wise. So basically, the retention and destruction of data that I have will minimize my risks and my problems with keeping it safe and private and secure. So they now are putting, the FIP, the Fair Information Privacy Practices, they're adding this may be the forgotten FIP, which is data minimization. And
Yeah.
so we're running our businesses and we're just compiling all this data and we don't use it anymore. It's not useful to us. We should get rid of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. A lot of these newer regulations, we've only been implementing the requirements over the last few years, but if a company is 20, 30, years old, you could have data that you haven't touched in years that it would make a lot of sense just to get rid of, right? If there's no purpose, if it's not being retained for any regulatory or legal reason, just get rid of it. And the liability decreases on you and the company. I also think with, data mapping, it helps you dictate what regulations and laws actually apply to the data that you're keeping. So it gives you a lot of insight into what applies to you and the company. You could be implementing things that you don't even need to. So I think
Yeah.
it gives you a lot of information that is helpful in our roles.
Yeah, I
Um,
think classifying and inventorying data, inventorying and classifying and mapping where it comes in and where it goes out and how and why is really number one step to getting a purpose and a scope around your policy program.
Exactly.
yeah, that's a very, very important point. And Eduardo, I guess, when we're talking about the program and the overall company culture, right? So you need to get the people behind understanding who should have access and implementing these policies. How should senior leadership be involved with that process?
role model. If it works for everybody, it needs to start from the top. So I had a case where I was a chief information security officer, much younger, so something crazy, and I told the CEO. The CEO asked me, "So we're investing a lot of money on this information security program that I put together. How are things going?" Because he was very much into security, and I told him not going well. Well, it's your fault, right? No, it's sorry to say, but it's everyone's fault. For example, your direct reports are sharing passwords with their executive assistants. And we are teaching everybody in the awareness training programs that passwords are like toothbrushes. It's all yours and only yours. And here you have your direct reports sharing passwords. Oh, man, I don't share my password. No, you don't. Who's sharing the password? Well, it's up to you to ask them. So in the next meeting that he called me and said, Eduardo told me that it seems that some of you are sharing passwords with your executive assistants. I don't. I highly recommend you to revise. He didn't give a straight order. I highly recommend you to revise this behavior immediately. The only one that was not sharing beside him was the vice president of the legal department. Everybody else was sharing. So, and then when they started modeling, the executive assistant started telling to the other assistants in the organization and so on. And so the role model, that's the key role of the executives. So it's not your problem, the information security department. It's everyone's responsibility. Cybersecurity is something that everyone has a piece of it. We can all succeed or we can all fail because of someone that didn't do their part. So I insist that the C-suite, especially the board, they are the ones setting the tone.
Exactly. No, you said it perfectly. I think, with anything within a company, right? It's tone from the top. And so taking security, taking privacy seriously, implementing basic training and rules, right? Robust passwords, don't share them. Make sure there's limited access, restricted access to things. Are you saving things in the right spot? Like these are just basic things that should be, day to day with everything that all employees are doing. But certainly tone from the top, taking it seriously because it's going to be very serious when an incident happens, right? And so no one's going to be laughing when you have an issue, but it's always, a lot of implementation and a lot of, implementing these policies and procedures takes a lot of time and effort. Understanding the data, it's not easy. And so a lot of times you don't see the benefit right away of a lot of things in the privacy and security space. And it's only wonderful when it's in place, if and when something happens. Speaking of the information response program specifically, how does that interact with the other companies and policies and procedures, Rita?
The incident response plan. I had to run my very own tabletop in the middle of a fire for one client. And the comment made on this slide in particular was your biggest risk is between the keyboard and the person sitting in the chair is so true. So what did we need at that time? And this was prior to GDPR, so weren't faced with a regulatory risk, but there was so much confusion that we had our systems breached, and the criminals not only did a wire fraud, but also then got access to a file share mechanism inside the network and were able to exfiltrate real dollars in the form of gift card codes. And so it was happening, and back then it was pretty comical in the sense when I reflect on it. But if you take these computers offline and you just throw them in the parking lot and hit them with a hammer, you're not solving the problem. And so when you have a response plan and you've run tabletops and you run tabletops and you run tabletops on every possible scenario, you want a team. You need the CISO, you need everybody who's in that team, and it better be the CEO too. So you need that team together. They need to detect and discover. There are a lot of times you don't discover the cyber problem, intruder, attacker, whatever you want to call him or her, or it, depending on who's doing it. Um, you don't know if they're there until you discover them. So you need to have something in place to discover it. We didn't.
Yeah,
And the consequence was the customers told us,
right.
you know. So the detection, discover, then you have to decide, is this real? Is this really important? How do I escalate this? What's going to happen? Are we exfiltrating personal information that doesn't belong to us? Are we losing money? Are we risking, what are we risking and how do we escalate it? So they're making these calls live in action while this is happening. They're also containing and remediating, hopefully containing, first, obviously, and then remediating the problem as best as possible to mitigate the risk. And notification and public announcements decisions have to be made relatively quickly. In some cases, it less than 24 hours, usually 72 hours. You got to decide, what do you have to do? And then you think about what happens afterwards. You have to go back and do, a post-incident analysis about what went wrong in this situation and
Mhm.
how do we fix it.
Right. And you've mentioned a lot, tone from the top, same with Eduardo, C-suite. How about an information security officer? And how do you know when you need one?
Well, regulators will tell you, basically all the cases I read, all the enforcement actions I read that are settled, demand in the settlement that you name a CISO or a privacy coordinator or whatever euphemism you want to use, but somebody has to be accountable for what's going on. The title doesn't matter. It matters is the accountability of it.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We've talked a lot about training, and preparing employees. Eduardo, what are some of the best practices for training employees?
Well, we could spend the whole day here talking about that. But what I would say, because we have only a few minutes left, it's that try to integrate any security analyst training into the existing training programs. If you have a training that is about the business conduct or of the code of conduct of company or new employee orientation, try to integrate small pills into each one of those trainings, and then have your separate training. So that we are able to use the existing training engine instead of, and I saw this happening many times. We get excited with our roles in cybersecurity, and we try to do our thing outside of everything else, and then it fails. So you can share budget, you can share resources, the focus and the sponsorship from senior executives if you tap into existing training engines in the organization.
It's a good point.
Yeah, all wonderful points. I know we only have a few minutes left. Final question. So, if your company only has limited resources, what should we really focus on first? What should the priorities be, um, for everything we discussed today? Rita, I don't know if you want to go first.
Real quickly, I think I would focus in on my data inventory. I would learn that top to bottom first. And I know it's expensive, but everybody has to really integrate it, integrate privacy and security into every piece of the business, every division, every space.
Certainly.
I agree with Rita. It's that try to map out your business or the goal of your agency or your foundation, and what is the data that enables that, and then focus on that. If you cannot do any much more, focus on identifying the data that supports the purpose of your organization.
Right.
I agree with both of you. And The only other thing I would add is probably a close second is the training of employees, right? So
Oh,
once you understand what needs to be done, really training the company on how to implement it and what to do when there's an incident. We're always scrambling when something happens. And so if you're more familiar with some of the steps, it's always helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much. This was a wonderful webinar, so I really appreciate it. And that's it for today. Take care.
Bye,
thank you.
everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.